Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Ludovic Klein of talking about the UFC's sharp decline, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following a weekend chock-a-block with fights. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to watch basically anything except the UFC. I know that there was a K1 on, haven't watched that yet. There was a Rising on, which I tried to watch, but the geniuses at Rising made it free for the day when I didn't watch it. And then I went to my Ryzen account to watch the event in the aftermath, and they hadn't uploaded it yet. There was a one championship event, which I can't work out how to watch for free. Used to be you just pretend you're from Thailand. And I'm not giving one championship my bank details because they're getting that desperate. They might just sell them. Oh, and there was PFL where my boy Stevie Ray hit the second ever Scottish twister, or the second hit of his career, which is basically getting a body triangle from the back and then pulling on their head as they try to turn to face you. But it's very cool watching it happen. Someone did it in Rising as well a while ago. And I think that was his retirement fight too, so shout out to the legend, Stevie Ray, the less appreciated member of Harlem Heat. But the UFC's Paris card was, I would describe it as solid. It was solid. There were people shitting on it, and I thought, it's a bit harsh. There were people saying it was great, and I'd go, it's a bit strong. But I think it was hurt by some bad judging, and it was elevated at the end by an absolutely dominating performance from Renato Moicano. Benoit Saint-Denis gave Dustin Poirier hell, and he fell apart because of the obvious flaws that exist in his game that we can all see. You know, he gets hit all the time walking forward. He really has a very limited bag of tools on the feet, and he spends a ton of energy because he's such a strength-oriented grappler. Because he's still very rough around the edges. He's only been doing this for like 5-6 years. But Dustin still had to weather the storm. He had to stand there on the fence taking a shellacking and trying to clip off little counterpunches in the middle of it. And Renato Moicano basically didn't get touched with any sort of severity. He might have got clipped a couple of times along the fence in the second round, but at no point was he in danger. The first round was absolute domination. The second round he actually didn't really do as much, and it wasn't really that impressive. But the damage had already been done so severely in the first round that Benoit Saint-Denis' face was just already in the process of swelling into something he couldn't see through. And respect to the doctor in this, because where were they a couple of months ago, they were in like Texas or somewhere. And the doctor came in to look at someone's eye. And he's going to the ref, I don't know, you call it. It's like, can he see or not? And I can't remember who it was. It might have been Mergliata, it might have been Herzog. But they basically like asked this doctor 3 or 4 times. They were like, you tell me, can he see? Can he see? Stop telling me it's not that bad. Can he see? And this guy was actually pretty good. He was like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to stop the fight because he can't see out of his eye. Which, when you're having a good scrap between good fighters, is always a bit sad. But it's a legitimate way to win. And those are the rules. You know, if a guy can't see punches coming, he gets the opportunity to lie. You know, at that point you're rolling the 20-sided die. You're going to try and pass that charisma test on whether you can see the number of fingers the ref's holding up or not. But if you get caught getting the number wrong, sorry, that's the fight over. And the reason is that you can't really defend yourself from punches if you can't see. However, of course, many, many great boxing matches have been massively affected by an eye closing and then been allowed to continue for rounds and rounds where the guy is obviously taking punches he otherwise wouldn't have on that side because he can't see. And of course, this is a sport that's, combat sports generally are heavily about depth perception to know how close or far from the opponent you're standing. So having one eye compromised is not just stuff coming in from that side that's going to blindside you. It's stuff where you think you're too far away and you're not. If you remember, George St. Pierre started looking for the left hook on Michael Bisping because it was sort of an open secret that his eye was absolutely trashed. And then he dropped him with that. Bisping somehow got in the ring like 4 weeks later in Shanghai to save that card. Helped along enormously by the fact that they didn't have a commission and he didn't have to respect any medical suspensions. People were like, well, he got choked out. He didn't suffer a concussion. It's like he got dropped by a left hook first. But then Kelvin Gastelum immediately chinned him with a left hand from that side the same way. So compromised vision's a big issue. And a lot of fighters made it part of their game, like Muhammad Ali. A huge part of his game was trying to swell people's eyes shut so that he could then start landing his right hand. But yeah, it's also important for depth perception because fighters spend a great deal of time learning how far their ideal distance is, or the relatively safe distance, where you can be right on the end of the opponent's reach, and if you take a step in, you can hit them, and if they swing at you, step back, and you're far enough away that they fall short. Which is why I'm always impressed by Shara Bullet, because that guy's striking style is all about knowing how far away he is from the opponent. And all his defense is like pulling back at the waist and letting the other guy fall short. But his eye is obviously ruined. You can see that his eye is a complete mess. And he's had a number of surgeries on his eye. And for a long time, it seemed like he couldn't get cleared in the US because of his eye. But he still manages to use his depth perception perfectly. So, anyway, this fight was Renato Moicano knowing what he's good at and get into it immediately. And what I really liked was, if you saw the film room I put out this week, it was Benoit Saint-Denis, body kicks and butt drags, I think I called it. It was just one of his fights, but if you've seen one Benoit Saint-Denis fight, you've seen them all. He relies so heavily on the left leg on the feet. And then I put out a YouTube short from that, where I basically just summed up, if you've got the left leg and they respect it as a southpaw, you can really build off that effectively, and you only really needed one good thing. Because he comes out and he throws that left leg as hard as he can at their body or their head. And then they start to respect it, and he can start sneaking through left straights, left wide lefts to the body, left overhands. He can start faking with his hip and sending them running backwards towards the cage, and then he can start wrestling them on it. The fight I used for the study, he hip fakes the guy back towards the cage. The guy hits the cage, reaches down to try and stop the body kick, and Benoit Saint-Denis just skips in with a knee to the head instead, knocks him down. But it's all about that left leg. And Renato Moicano came out and obviously waited for that left leg. If you watch him in that first round, he's just waiting for the kick. The moment the kick comes, parries it down across Benoit Saint-Denis and steps in on the clinch. Seen it 1,000 times. John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson. I say it every time, but first time John Jones was ever taken down in the UFC, or in MMA, I think, generally, was when he threw a side kick. Gustafsson parried it offline and stepped in. Because if you're out of position, you spend your whole time wrestling and striking from this one set position, this stance that you've mastered, and the moment you kick and the guy bats it across you, if it comes down across your body, you're out of position and you've got a movement to make to get back on position. Or you're defending straight from there with your legs crossed up. So Moicano gets the body lock and he starts running around towards Saint-Denis' back. He ended up like dropping into a sort of a dogfighty position and ran Saint-Denis over into half guard. And then Benoit Saint-Denis is a great example of a guy who gets up really well, generally. He's got a great butterfly game. He can sweep and he can stand up from the butterfly. He's got a great single underhook get up, the classic half guard get up. If you wanted to see someone getting up in MMA well, I'd use Benoit Saint-Denis as a great example. Watch his fight with Frivola. Gets up effortlessly and sweeps Frivola the first time. But Renato Moicano rode him beautifully. This was a really interesting matchup because in MMA, the number of skills you can have and the vast variety of skills you can have means that you don't really have to have like elite guard passing skills a lot of the time. But in this instance, having elite guard passing skills for Renato Moicano really played well against Benoit Saint-Denis' way of getting up. Because he's trying to use the butterflies and Moicano's just floating on him, sagging on him. There's a lot of things you do when someone's got butterfly hooks on you, the feet inside your thighs, to make it difficult for them to sweep you. So one that he did a lot in this fight was just posting the top of your head underneath their jaw, keeps their back straight so they can't get their head underneath yours, so they can't sit up and start sweeping you. He often had bicep ties with his hands over Saint-Denis' biceps, which is great for denying you any sort of really good grip, because you can sweep someone from the bottom of the butterfly with underhooks, you can sweep them with overhooks, you can sweep them with a collar tie on the head and a wrist control, or an elbow control. But you can't really sweep them effectively if they've got if their hands are just in your biceps and you can't really grip anything decently and pull it to you. Even from the half guard, Moicano was just floating on him beautifully. If you watch someone like Gordon Ryan, someone like, simply the best grappler in the world, but he'll go into people's half guards and he'll give them the underhook, because the underhook is the really powerful way you get up and the way you enter on deep half guard, Lucas Leach style, coyote guard, dogfight, all that stuff. All of it comes off the underhook for the bottom man. But the underhook's just one attachment. Everything else your bodies are doing affects how that underhook works. So Gordon Ryan will often give up the underhook, keep the web of his hand in the opponent's armpit, and start walking his knee over into mount. And I think you saw Moicano do a bit of that. He played some whizzer as well. He just made it awful to be under him, because when you've got the underhook, if you're stuck down on your shoulder, if you're stagnant at any moment, you're getting elbowed in the head. Saint-Denis got mounted and then worked him back to closed guard, and Moicano kept his hands on Saint-Denis' biceps, and then he turned over an elbow. It was one of the really bad ones that I think caused the cut. And you saw Saint-Denis go, oh no, okay, right, can't hold him in closed guard either. And he immediately put his feet back in for butterfly guard. And this is it. I love playing guard. I love the guard. I love trends in the guard and looking at ways the guard is being played and the bottom game is being played, because it makes a big difference in MMA, how you are able to attack and get up from a disadvantageous position. But the last part's the most important part of that sentence. It's always a disadvantageous position. So if you're stuck there and the guy is good at controlling you and countering your controls on him, and he can just float on top of you and drop elbows occasionally, he's going to beat you up. And Moicano did more than just occasionally dropping elbows. This was the most aggressive I've seen his ground and pound in possibly ever. I think ever, actually. A lot of the time he looks like technical and methodical on top. But if you saw his fights with like Drew Dober, even when he got on top of Cub Swanson and stuff, he's not trying to beat their brains out. And here he looked like he was trying to beat Saint-Denis' brains out. I think the really interesting part is that the second round began and Saint-Denis' face was already all busted up. And Renato Moicano starts waiting for the kick again, and the kick doesn't come. And all of Moicano's takedown attempts in that round are nowhere near as good. And Benoit Saint-Denis is able to stay off his back for the most part. And then from the first kick that got him taken down in the first round to the second kick that he throws, he throws it with 30 seconds left in the second round. That's when he goes back to the kicks. So he had this one weapon that makes everyone worry and keeps them busy, and he couldn't use it because the first time he used it, he got taken down and roughed up for the entire round, so he didn't use it again in the second round, which meant that Moicano could sit back and sort of jab, pull, jab. Most of this round was just Moicano pulling away from punches or getting hit by punches and then jabbing back. And it has to feel good when someone's face is that messed up, because the damage is already... there's a ticking clock on that, because you see any fighter the day after a fight and their face looks worse than when they were in the fight a lot of the time, because you're still waiting on swelling. So Moicano's just there backhanding jabs, knowing that it's going to get worse for Benoit Saint-Denis. There's no ticking clock on Moicano. He's just dominated the first round. And then, Doctor comes in at the end of the second round and ends the fight. But had it gone into the third round, Moicano would have been doing the same thing again. There was no rush on him after the beating he'd put on Saint-Denis in the first round. Now, of course, attitudes have immediately become that Benoit Saint-Denis was not good and is not good. And no, the truth is that, everyone who saw him fight and knew anything about fighting knew that he was a very flawed fighter, but he's still a very, very good fighter. And Moicano is, he's just going through a real strong period. He's worked out what he's good at. He's worked out what he's not good at. He worked this opponent out very specifically, because if you see Moicano, sometimes he meets strikers and he looks really slick because he's got a good read on them. He feels comfortable with his counters. Other times you see him against fighters you'd consider less scary, and he's just head down, running in, trying to get bad takedowns, looking awful, which brings us on to the co-main event with Brendan Allen, to be honest. But yeah, great performance by Moicano. He's on a really solid little run at the moment. And you know what? There's so little going on in the lightweight division at the moment that the idea of Moicano versus Islam Makhachev, obviously you massively favour Islam Makhachev, but I'm I want to see him fight all kinds of styles of fighter. Why not Renato Moicano? Beats giving Dustin Poirier another title fight, or trying to let Michael Chandler into the title picture. What's the streak right now? 4 wins in a row, 3 finishes. He looked great against Riddell back in 2022. Looked great against Jalen Turner, even though he got hurt in his last one before this. And the only one that really was disappointing for people was the Drew Dober one, which was partly because Drew Dober has a big flaw and Moicano didn't want to get knocked out and played it quite safe. But it is kind of awkward because we're going back to 2022 was when he fought Rafael dos Anjos, granted on short notice, but dos Anjos is an old man and he made Moicano look pretty bad. But then that is the last loss on Moicano's record since that disastrous 3 fights. It was a 4-fight streak where he had 3 losses being finished. against guys who probably shouldn't have. Chan Sung-jung, that late in his career, 2019 was not strong Korean zombie. Rafael Fiziev, Fiziev came out of nowhere and was largely unknown. Jose Aldo, getting finished by Jose Aldo in the second round. Jose Aldo is not, and even now, not a great finisher. Big hitter, but not a great finisher. And he just clubbed Moicano, and Moicano got overwhelmed, and that's kind of like Moicano's bad habit. He gets flustered. But anyway, enough about like the negatives of Moicano, because he had just had an amazing performance. So I'm excited for his future. Co-main event was not exciting. It was a weird fight because Brendan Allen is like a sort of an all-rounder, and Nasruddin Imavov is seen more as a striker, but he's got very strong takedown defense. He's a good grappler. He's a good all-rounder, but he's very much at home in the striking portion of the fight. Brendan Allen is much more known as like a jack of all trades, and it was a weird fight because he wasn't doing terribly on the feet. He was losing, but like you can still do stuff on the feet effectively, working towards an all-around game plan while losing on the feet. And he didn't look terrified of being on the feet, but he kept shooting these dreadful takedowns. And it looked like he'd been given a game plan and he was trying to stick to it religiously without engaging in anything that wasn't the game plan. And he kept shooting these takedowns that were just dreadful, and Imavov sprawling out on him and getting really good positions off it. He sprawled out on him, I think it was the second round, because the first round was all Allen. That was actually really impressive. He got a takedown out of the clinch, I think it was, and then he never really tried much clinch work after that. But he comes out for the second round, he shoots these takedowns, and there was one where he shot in, ended up like belly down on the floor underneath Imavov's sprawl. He held the leg, and he tried to sit through to half guard, which is a very common transition for grapplers. You come in on the single leg, they sprawl out heavy on you, you keep your hand draped over their ankle or calf, probably ankle's best, you want to get down near the foot, but you sit through and you insert your bottom leg into half guard. Don't know if I'd recommend doing it in MMA, but Damian Maia used to do it a lot, Rafael Lovato did it a lot. It was a really good one for them because when their wrestling wasn't working, they had that second thing they could do. They could pull themselves in under the guy and then come up, wrestle up, and take the guy down from there. Because if you pull yourself in underneath the guy, you've got their leg and you're underneath them, which is what they're trying to prevent you from doing when you're just shooting in on the feet. But he sat through and Nasruddin Imavov just ran round him into north-south. And it was really, really bad. And I was going, that was weird to watch. And he just kept attempting these bad takedowns and not really like committing to being on the feet much. And the thing that was really puzzling was that when he got hit, he didn't look really petrified or worried. When he threw punches back, it wasn't like he was outlanding Imavov, but he was landing enough. And it was like, all you need to do is strike confidently for a bit. He's probably not knocking you out. Imavov's not like a knockout artist. He's not a big hitter. And it didn't look like Allen was getting shaken up by the blows. All you need to do is like throw some kicks, especially if he doesn't want to go to the ground with you. Throw some kicks because you're not going to get taken down. He's not going to follow you to the ground. Try and corner him along the fence. Use some fence work. Like Roman Dolidze, his fight with Imavov was terrible, but his footwork's arse. And he was still able to push Imavov to the fence for long stretches of the fight. Couldn't get him down. That's a problem to deal with when you get there. But push him to the fence, rough him up. Brendan Allen could conceivably push Imavov to the fence and try and rough him up in the clinch. I mean, I'm putting a lot of blame on Brendan Allen here because Imavov did his job. He looked great. Well, I don't know if he looked great. He looked good. I saw someone say, this is the most gassed I've ever seen two fighters from not doing much. But aside from that first round, Imavov looked like his usual self, smooth on the feet, footwork a little bit messy sometimes, but hands great, head movement great, kicks great. Love that front kick to the body. Love that he hides the switch to southpaw, coming out of clinches and things, and then throws the left kick to the body. A lot of people came out of this like less hype about Imavov. I like having him around. I think he's good, a good addition to the top end of the middleweight division. I think why not just work him towards the title picture? It's not looking strong in the top end of that division right now. I think it'd be really interesting to see him against Dricus because he's very clean and good at punishing people's ugly striking. Strickland has an ugly style that punishes good striking, punishes people for trying to straight hit with him. Imavov has a style that's much more suited to beating up ugly striking styles. So if you throw him in with Buckley, Curtis, people who don't build off the jab, people who don't have like good methodical ways of getting to you. So him versus Drickus, that could be fun. William Gomez versus Joe Anderson Brito. I hate watching William Gomez's fights. I watched them all when they happened, and then I tried to watch them again this week, being like, maybe I missed some interesting stuff, and really all he does, like occasional left kick to the body, step up slappy right kick to the outside of the lead leg, take a break for 20 seconds. So low output, unbelievably low output. The moment he came off the regional scene, he couldn't get stoppages anymore. He couldn't even hurt people. And he won his last fight before this by kicking the guy in the groin, and then the referee going, well, I stopped the fight. I'm sorry it was in your groin, but now it's a TKO. Very funny fight to watch the finish of. Don't bother watching the rest of it. It's terrible. Joe Anderson Brito is like, tries to be an all-action fighter. He just swings hard all the time, and he managed to do it for 3 rounds here. And he was sort of, the judges, there was some very clear hometown bias here, but even the French don't enjoy watching William Gomez. So trash fight, and William Gomez somehow moves into like title contention in featherweight. Brian Battle versus Kevin Giuseppe was fine. Brian Battle's, I love watching him kick. Not a huge fan of his boxing, but he got it done with his boxing in this one, so can't complain too much. There was a trend on this card. The next 2 fights, Morgan Charrier versus Gabriel Miranda, Fares Ziam versus Matt Frivola, and then there was one on the... Which one was it? Oh, it was Imavov versus Allen, but there's dudes coming out of the clinch swinging. It's one of the best areas to hit people. Has always been in boxing and will continue to be in sports that allow grappling and striking. When guys are changing mode, because when your arms are busy doing things like digging underhooks, and then you break away and those arms are still out there underneath the guy's armpits, there's a gap between them being there and them being up in a guard. And that's when you can chin people. Ziam got Frivola with a great knee as he was trying to pummel his arm back in and turn into him from a back body lock. But Charrier caught Miranda. He had an underhook. Miranda tried an Uchimata with the overhook. Charrier limp-armed his way out of the whizzer, and Miranda went into like a full spin and turned around into a left hook. And the left hook was so short, and Morgan Charrier is not like a massive banger, but it continues to show you, like, it's the ones you don't see coming. When you do a spin and you turn right round into the left hook, that's what'll do you. But I didn't much rate Gabriel Miranda before this fight, and I don't much rate him afterwards, to be honest. Happy for Charrier, though. Gets a win and a bonus in front of his hometown crowd. Fares Ziam, really impressed me. He was probably, aside from Moicano, probably the standout performance on this card for me. In against Frivola. Frivola, fun fighter, was on a really good little streak going into the fight with Benoit Saint-Denis. He beat Gennaro Valdez, Otman Azaitar, and Drew Dober. Azaitar and Dober, very scary prospects. Lost that fight to Benoit Saint-Denis off a head kick really early in the fight, but a ton of stuff happened in that fight. But yeah, this really just coming out party for Fares Ziam. He'd had a first round loss to Terence McKinney, which would make you think that he's a scrub, but he bounced back with a couple of wins over Figlak and Jai Herbert. Got a win over Claudio Poiles. But this one, he just looked like a massive problem. And it kind of reminded me of Matt Frivola's fight with Violent Bob Ross, Luis Pena, which he got the split decision in. But if you saw that, Frivola really struggled with the length and height of Pena. He was trying to get in on clinches and getting kneed in the face with jumping knees and things and hit with uppercuts and long jabs. And he was just having a really hard time getting to him. He's throwing big overhand shots and running in with his head down. And then when he got Pena on the ground, he had trouble holding him there. He was always being attacked with Kimuras and things. There was a lot of that in this fight with Ziam. And every time you saw them, it was like Ziam's height was making a massive difference because Frivola's having to lean so far forward to try and throw overhands and falling so short all the time, getting popped with long left hooks on the counter. There were numerous occasions in this fight where Ziam's back foot was on the fence and Frivola would start wading in and Ziam would hit him with a left hook way out in front of him because he's so long and so tall. And then he'd step offline and Frivola would just miss by a mile. He hit that beautiful inside trip from the clinch and he pulled Frivola's leg so far back behind it that Frivola just collapsed on his back. And you're going, oh yeah, the height is making a difference. The other one that the height really made a difference on grappling-wise was he kept locking his hands under the crotch for that Habib-style lift and kick, sweep out the standing leg. The one that Habib did against Conor and Dustin, both when they were fighting off the other hand. So he wants to lock his hands around your body in a body lock. But if you hold his free hand, he can't get his hands together. So he punches it between your legs, locks his hands under your crotch, lifts you up, and then kicks out the leg that you would be hopping onto. And when it's someone who's the same height, it's all about timing. You've got to get it right. Makhachev's done it too. You lift and you try and run them forward a bit so that they hop. And as they hop and their foot becomes unweighted, you tap it out. But in this fight, Ziam would get his hands locked. He'd stand up and Frevola would be floating in the air, feet off the floor. It was just such a funny visual. It's rare that you see the height make such problems for someone in grappling. It's normally in the fighting at range, which, again, Ziam really did well in this fight. But Frevola, he's a stumpy, cut-off guy at lightweight. I think he's 5'9", and his successful run was all against guys of similar height, 5'9", 5'10", 5'8". Whereas Ziam, coming from fighting Jai Herbert, who is a long, straight-hitting, tight mechanics sort of gangly fella, to having Matt Frevola wade forward with his chin on a platter, got to be really refreshing. Get some target practice in. Oh, if you want to see wading forward with your chin on a platter, the guy that they let fight Satoshi for the title in Rising this weekend. I've seen this one because it was a 21-second fight, but before the fight, I was looking into Luis Gustavo, and going, so what's he do? Everyone's got to be an all-rounder nowadays, but typically people have their strengths. Is he a striker? Is he a grappler? And I'm watching him, and he's throwing his right hand 4 times in a row. He throws a 1-2 at this guy. And every time he throws his right hand, he falls in behind it. Like, he leaves his right foot behind and he falls forward with his chin first. And I went, oh, that's not good. And then, wouldn't you know it, he just gets smoked on the feet in 21 seconds by a jiu-jitsu specialist. Anything else happen? Eileen Perez arm triangled some girl and then twerked on her face, which was funny, but she did miss weight before this. And people were going, oh my God, she's going to die in there. And if you've been in this sport long enough, you know that a lot of the time, the person with the really horrible weight cut that looks like they're about to die on the scale wins. But you also know that doesn't invalidate the criticism of current weight cutting trends. It's gross. She got on the scale and she's almost passing out. Her eyes are glazed over. She's shaking and she still hits the flex. And missed weight as well. I love missing weight and then flexing. It's like being a big fat guy in pro wrestling and doing the flex. It's great. But she just had her way with this girl, Zeleznyakova, Daria, from the hit TV show Daria. And I was reading people's reactions to this. They were like, oh, Daria's actually got really good stand-up. She's just not been allowed to use it. It's like, Eileen Perez is not a particularly strong takedown artist. If you're struggling at this point, what are you even doing? Oh, a couple of other cool things. Chris Duncan's guillotine. Lovely arming guillotine. I've said it before, but finally I'm getting good at arming guillotines after years and years of not doing them because they're so difficult. But the arming guillotine used to be magic. Guys who were good at it, they always had some kind of silly grip that they try and teach you. And you'd be going, oh, but how do you do it? And they go, this is how I get the tap every time. And then you'd watch them in a fight and it would work 1 in 3 times. And every time it didn't work, they'd get held down and smashed. So even being a specialist in the arming guillotine, it was kind of it limited you because you would go to it and rely on it. And when Verdum hit one on Cain Velasquez, a very gassed Cain Velasquez, I thought that was going to come back and people would just be jumping gillies all over the place. But Chris Duncan actually did jump a gilly successfully. And this guy Oki's head popped out, but he was unconscious. And Chris Duncan's there in his close guard going, he's unconscious. I'm trying to push him off. It reminded me of Rampage Jackson, when he fought Ricardo Arona, very famous KO because he picks him up from inside a triangle choke and slams him. And it's one of the most famous slam KOs in MMA history. It's also largely a KO because their heads collide. So it is a headbutt KO, really. But before that, earlier in the match, Jackson was in Arona's closed guard, and Arona upkicked him, and Jackson just slumps on his chest. And Arona goes, oh, hold on a minute. And it takes him a second to realize that Jackson's out of it. And then by the time he signaled to the ref, Jackson's sort of going, what? And fighting back. It was a very funny little clip. Speaking of up kicks, I saw Seika Izawa up-kicked Kana Asakura, who's a tiny lass. Up-kicked her in the face about 3 times in a row, and she took it and came right back in. And you're going, wow, chin on that lass. Because the up-kick is, no matter who you are and how hard you train your kicks, the up-kick is still going to be like one of your strongest movements. Because it's a leg press into someone's jaw. So to take 3 in a row and come back in, very impressive. Taylor Lapilus and Vince Morales had an okay fight. I really liked Lapilus' use of... someone's already said this on Twitter. I think it was Josie Aldo. But they pointed out southpaw double attack. Left straight, left body kick, left knee. I suppose that's a triple attack, but it all goes together. Every time you go to turn your left shoulder and left hip, the guy goes, oh my God, the left straight's coming. Or, oh my God, the left kick's coming. And you just learn, you work out what they're scared of at that particular moment. You start throwing the other one. So he keeps showing the left straight and throwing the left knee, showing the left kick, throwing the left knee. And then I really like Vince Morales' spinning elbow he had a head outside single along the fence, and he did a spinning elbow and came back in with his head on the inside for a head inside single. I went, that's nice. And then towards the end of the fight, he gets the clinch and he starts limp arming through, and you're going, oh, he's going for the back elbow, the John Jones spinning back elbow. And by the time that he'd freed his arm to spin, which you need to do, you need to shorten your arms up and take them out of the underhooks or overhooks to spin, he'd lost confidence in it, and he sort of half did it and gave off his back and went, damn. And then there was a surprisingly good fight on the early prelims between Daniel Barres and Victor Altamirano. Altamirano came out in this long traditional martial arts stance, side on, like he wanted to throw some side kicks and spinning kicks. And Barres crowded him to the fence, and Altamirano did not circle out quick enough. And he was stuck in his side on stance along the fence, and Barres stepped in and cracked him on the chin. And that's one of the intriguing parts of the side-on stance. You're more exposed to low kicks, you're more exposed to single legs. There's a load of things you're more exposed to, but that is the case with any positional decision you make. If you're a very squared stance, you're more open to being double-legged. You're more open to being hit with right straights and teeps and things down the center line. You have better access to your rear hand, but you don't have the same... it doesn't cover the same distance, so it might not be as powerful. But when you've got a guy who fights from a long stance and does that sort of like karate/taekwondo style striking, typically when they get towards the fence, they need to flatten their stance out and circle out sideways, because you can't sidestep very well from a bladed stance facing the opponent. But Altamirano was not doing that, and he was getting lumped up when he got close to the fence. Or doing really dumb things like getting close to the fence and going, oh shit, better throw my back leg, the one that's going to have to travel the furthest. And the guy's going to step up the middle and hit me on the chin with a left hook. So that got him in trouble early. But then he started using the back fist as a way to sort of bail himself out of there. He'd step across himself and do a spinning back fist when Barres came in to throw combinations near the fence. And I think he dropped him a couple of times. Or he dropped him the first time and hurt him a couple of times. But it worked really well as like a get-out-of-jail-free card. And it reminded me of just the other week we were talking about Emmanuel Newton doing that. Walking along the fence, crossing his own feet over each other, spinning with the back fist when the guy came in to attack him. This sport's about problem solving, and getting cornered along the fence or getting cornered along the ropes or whatever boundary you have, getting trapped against it is a problem. But there's a lot of ways to get around it. The one I favour the most, and the one that gives me the most faith in fighters, is not getting there, like being cognizant of where you are at all times and circling out early. But waiting and throwing a big back fist or back elbow works just as well. But that was a really fun scrap between those two. But that was about all I saw this week. It was good. I'll be back midweek to talk about... I'll talk about the K1 event because Yuki Yoza fought, and you know I love Yuki Yoza. And I'll talk about Rising, and I might even talk about PFL, if I hear that it wasn't super terrible. But we've also got UFC 307. Is it 307? Man, where does the time go? It's UFC 307. Super weird main event. Khalil Roundtree in a UFC pay-per-view main event. I just did a shrug. You can't see that, but he's always been my boy. I think he's got a pretty hard ceiling on where he should be, but that ceiling didn't work. The guys he fought messed up enough that he's now in the title picture. And also because they don't want Ankalaev laying all over Pereira. We've got a Raquel Pennington title fight. We've got Jose Aldo coming back against Mario Batista. Yes. Loads of stuff on that card to talk about, so we'll talk about that on the Boycast. And I may do another film room this week. I've got a nice idea. I won't share it just yet, but it'll be on the YouTube channel. And it's your job to share and subscribe, because I've never asked you to before. And now all I ask is so precious little. So sign up to the Patreon if you want to get in on the Boycast and watch the Wang Chinoy film room I did a couple of weeks ago. To send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. Oh, and I've also got Instagram now. I'm your boy Jack Slack. The unstoppable charisma of Juliana Pena bless.